Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to improve yourself, the more exhausted and frustrated you become?
Oh, absolutely. It's a very specific kind of burnout.
Right. I mean, you read all the books, you try to build these elaborate habits, you attempt to, engineer away your flaws.
And yet the finish line just keeps moving further away.
Exactly. You're constantly running, but you're never actually arriving. So today's deep dive is going to completely dismantle that exact treadmill.
Yeah, we are diving into the philosophy of J. Krishnamurti today, and this is definitely not your typical life hack advice.
No, not at all. We are looking at his really radical argument that the very desire to become better is, well, it's actually the fundamental trap that's keeping you stuck.
It is. Because we basically treat our own minds like these endless renovation projects.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right, and when the renovation inevitably stalls, we just assume, well, I must need better tools, or maybe a new therapist, or a superior productivity system.
Yeah, we blame the tools instead of the project itself.
Exactly. We rarely stop to question the actual structural integrity of the self-improvement project. And Krishnamurti suggests that the very motive to improve is fundamentally flawed right from the start.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that. Because to really understand why self-improvement is a structural failure, we first have to rack our heads around what the self actually is in this framework.
Right, and it's not what most people think.
Yeah, usually when you sitting there listening, think of yourself, you think of your physical appearance, maybe your personal history, your quirks.
But the source material defines the self as a much more comprehensive, deeply conditioned entity.
What does it actually look like?
Well, the self, as he outlines it, is basically the total accumulation of everything that has ever been impressed upon your brain.
Wow, everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's the language you speak, the specific cultural traditions you were raised in, the dogmas you absorbed in school.
Right.
But, and this is the critical part, it's also your internal contradictions. The self is your anxiety, your sorrows, and your hypocrisy.
The hypocrisy, like saying one thing and doing another.
Exactly. It's that widening gap between what you outwardly project to the world and what you inwardly feel. He essentially argues that the self is simply the whole movement of thought over time.
And he even shoots down that popular spiritual escape hatch, right? Like the idea of a higher self.
Oh, yeah. Completely waves it away.
Because we do that so often. We console ourselves by thinking, well, my everyday ego is a total mess, but deep down, I have this pure, untainted super consciousness.
Which is such a comforting thought, but he points out that this concept of a higher self is still just a product of your brain thinking.
Right. You manufactured that concept just to feel safe.
Exactly. So whether it's your petty everyday ego or your lofty, spiritual ideal, it's all just thought. It is all the self.
Which really exposes the fundamental paradox of self-improvement.
It does. Because if the self is simply this massive historical accumulation of conditioning and fears and hypocrisies, what exactly is the instrument you are using to improve it?
You're using your thoughts.
Yes, but your thoughts are the conditioning.
Right.
He argues you cannot improve agony or despair. Like making your selfishness 10% more polite doesn't dissolve it.
Or, finding a socially acceptable way to express your greed. That doesn't fix the greed. It just masks it.
Exactly.
It's kind of like asking a corrupted computer algorithm to debug itself.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right, because the diagnostic tool you are trying to use is written in the exact same corrupted code as the virus you're trying to eliminate.
Which means any fix it generates is just going to be a new variation of the corruption.
Yeah, you aren't actually solving the problem. You are just creating a more complex, sophisticated bug.
That captures the futility of it so well. The system cannot cure the system.
So what's the alternative then?
Well, what Krishnamurti is arguing is that true freedom does not mean meticulously debugging that corrupted code line by line.
Okay.
True freedom means abandoning the operating system entirely. You do not improve your psychological condition. You must be entirely free from it.
But, and I know everyone listening is thinking this, as soon as you decide to walk away from that corrupted system, your brain immediately starts calculating the timeline.
Oh, of course. We are obsessed with timelines.
Right. If you accept that you need to be completely free of your anger, say, your first instinctive question is, well, how long will that take?
And that timeline is exactly what he identifies as our next great illusion, the trap of psychological time.
Okay, we need to clarify this, because he is careful to distinguish this from physical time, right? Physical time is undeniably real.
Yes. Very real and very necessary. Technological and physical progress operate on a linear timeline.
Like moving from a bullock cart to a jet engine.
Or from shouting across a field to instantaneous global communication. I mean, a seed needs time to become a tree. Learning to engineer a bridge requires years of study.
Right, so the physical world requires a duration to change states.
Exactly. But our brains take that undeniable physical reality and we project it inward.
We falsely map the physics of the external world onto our inner psychological lives.
We do, and that is where the illusion takes hold. We assume that, because it takes 5 years to learn a new language, it must take 5 years to become a peaceful person.
But wait, I have to push back on this a little bit,
Okay, go ahead.
because this challenges everything we currently understand about behavioral psychology and, neurobiology.
How so?
Well, if I have spent 20 years reacting to stress with explosive anger, there is a literal biological neural pathway in my brain built for that reaction. Doesn't neuroplasticity demand time? Doesn't unlearning a deep, decades-old habit inherently require a duration of practice?
That's a really fair point, and what's fascinating here is how he frames the difference between surface behavior and true internal cessation.
Okay, explain that.
If we were talking about changing a surface-level behavior, like learning to count to 10 before yelling, yes, that takes time.
Right, that's management.
Exactly. But Krishnamurti is talking about the total cessation of the internal conflict itself, not just managing its outward symptoms.
So how does that work without time?
Let's use your example of anger. If you say, I am a violent person, but I will gradually become nonviolent, what is the actual state of your mind during that interval of time?
Well, during that interval, I guess I'm actively suppressing my impulses. Like I am gritting my teeth and trying really hard to be calm.
Which means you are still in conflict.
Oh,
Right. During the weeks or months or years you are trying to be nonviolent, the violence is still operating. It is just being managed.
I see. So you are moving from the reality of what is to an idealized projection of what should be.
Exactly. And he argues that this interval of time you create is simply a postponement.
Because the person who is trying to be nonviolent is actively sustaining a violent internal state.
Yes. Therefore, freedom from a psychological state cannot be a gradual process of management. It must be an instant cessation.
Man, that is incredibly counterintuitive.
It really is.
We're so conditioned to revere the struggle, to respect the process of becoming better.
But he is saying that the process itself is just the disease masquerading as the cure. To practice implies you are currently in conflict.
To practice peace means you are currently at war with yourself.
Exactly. And as long as you are at war, you are not peaceful. This is why he insists that psychological time is complete fabrication. Transformation has to happen entirely outside the concept of a timeline.
Which, okay, brings us to the obvious, massive question.
The how.
Exactly. How is it practically possible to instantly dissolve something like deep-seated anger without time passing? If it isn't gradual unlearning, what is the actual mechanism of this instant transformation?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he points to a linguistic and psychological trap we all fall into. It's all about realizing who is actually doing the observing.
Okay.
We really have to examine how we fracture our own consciousness. Think about when an intense emotion arises. How do we frame it?
We say, I am angry, or I have to control my jealousy.
Right. We speak as if the jealousy is an entirely separate entity from us.
Yes, there is me, the rational observer, the manager. And then there is the jealousy, this like rogue employee or unwanted intruder that I need to discipline or evict.
And that fracture, that separation, is the source of all the psychological friction. Krishnamurti states it with just brutal clarity. He says, I am greed. Violence is me.
Wow.
The observer is the observed.
So the part of my mind looking at the violence and saying, I am violent and I must stop.
Is constructed of the exact same psychological material as the violence itself. There is absolutely no separation between the thinker and the thought.
That makes me think of an autoimmune response.
Oh, how so?
Well, imagine your body suddenly stops recognizing its own cells and attacks them, thinking they're foreign invaders.
Right.
You are literally fighting a war against yourself, burning immense energy, causing massive inflammation and damage.
Yeah.
And that conflict will last forever as long as your system believes the cells are separate from you. But the absolute microsecond your system recognizes, wait, this is me, I am attacking my own tissue, the autoimmune war stops.
Yeah.
The realization of unity instantly ends the conflict. No time has to pass.
That highlights the physics of our emotional energy perfectly. We spend an unbelievable amount of our daily caloric and psychological energy maintaining that exact autoimmune response.
Building a firewall between us and our bad feelings.
And then actively fighting to keep those feelings behind the firewall.
So the friction of the fight is actually what sustains the emotion.
Exactly. By trying to push the anger away, we are feeding it the energy it needs to survive. The resistance sustains the entity.
Wow. So what happens when we stop resisting?
When you realize there is no manager, when that division between the observer and the observed collapses, the firewall drops.
And all that wasted energy is freed up.
Yes. He says you are finally able to observe the feeling with all of your energy. You observe the anger entirely without the friction of wanting it to go away.
And then,
When a psychological state is observed with undivided energy and zero resistance, it combusts. It dissolves instantly. That is the mechanism of transformation without time.
that is just, it's wild. But it creates a fascinating paradox, I think, for anyone listening.
What's up?
Because the moment you intellectually grasp this, the moment you realize that dropping resistance leads to this profound peace, your immediate biological instinct is to desire that state.
Of course.
You think, oh man, I want that combustion. I want to be free of this anxiety. But the source material warns that the moment you introduce desire, you are stepping right back onto the treadmill.
You all. Desire is the reinstatement of psychological time.
Because we value willpower so much in our culture, right? We view it as the ultimate virtue.
We do, but Krishnamurti defines will simply as the concentrated summation of desire.
Really?
Yeah, when you say, I will achieve this inner peace, you are just expressing a potent desire. And he is unequivocal here. Psychological transformation cannot ever happen through the machinery of desire.
Okay, so he maps the exact neurological pivot where normal perception mutates into suffering through desire.
He does. He breaks it down into a sequence, and it begins entirely naturally.
Okay, let's walk through it.
First, there is perception. You see a beautiful house or a striking piece of land.
Sure.
Second, there is contact. You are in proximity to it. Third, there is sensation. Your biology responds to the aesthetics. You feel a natural sensory pleasure.
And up to this precise microsecond, there is absolutely no psychological trap.
Exactly. Sensation is an inevitable biological reality. You can't avoid it.
But the fatal trap happens in the next microsecond.
Yes. Following sensation, thought hijacks the process.
The thought steps in.
Thought takes that biological sensation and it renders an image.
Ah, and it is the image rendering that ruins us.
Totally.
You see the beautiful house,
Mhm.
you feel the pleasure, and then thought instantly generates a mental movie of you owning that house, of you living in it, of how the neighbors will view you.
And that precise moment of image rendering is the exact origin of desire.
Wow.
Once thought creates the image, it creates a gap between your current reality and that projected future.
And to cross that gap, you need time.
Exactly. So desire creates the image creates the gap requires time, and time creates the conflict of trying to become.
And boom, you are instantly trapped back in the illusion.
You are right back on the treadmill.
And because this trap makes us feel so inadequate, right? Because we constantly feel insecure, frightened, anxious about not reaching these images we've rendered, we panic.
We do. And when we panic, we look for an exit strategy outside of ourselves.
We outsource our psychological salvation.
That is basically the definition of human history, our reliance on outside agencies.
We seek out charismatic gurus, we elect authoritarian leaders, we meticulously study sacred books.
He even argues that we conceptualize God primarily as a projection of our deep desire for absolute perfect security in a really chaotic universe.
But I have to ask the practical question here.
Sure, go ahead.
If personal desire is a trap because it creates time and conflict, and outside help, whether it's a leader or a therapist or a divine concept, is just a projection of our insecurity, where does that actually leave us?
It sounds incredibly bleak, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, are we just stranded entirely on our own in this psychological mess?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the historical evidence of humanity's approach to suffering. Krishnamurti asks us to be brutally honest here.
Okay.
For thousands of years, humanity has relied on leaders, external authority, religious doctrines, outside pressures to help us change. Have they actually transformed human consciousness?
Are we fundamentally less greedy or less violent or less anxious today than we were 3,000 years ago?
The source material is unsparing on this point.
Yeah, we are still deeply divided. We still exploit each other.
The more sophisticated our societies get, the more cunning our corruption becomes.
Right. We haven't fundamentally evolved psychologically at all. We just have faster internet and weapons capable of vaporizing millions of people in seconds.
Exactly. The outside agencies have completely failed to end human psychological suffering. Therefore, he concludes, we must definitively discard them.
We cannot rely on external authority to do the internal work.
We have to rely entirely on our own capacity to observe what is, without letting thought step in to render an image of what should be.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's synthesize this profound, kind of unsettling journey.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We started by looking at the exhaustion of self-improvement, the constant striving to be a better person. And what we've discovered through his philosophy is that the self you are trying to improve is really nothing more than a closed loop of conditioned thoughts and societal hypocrisies.
Right, you cannot fix a corrupted system using the system itself.
And to be free, you have to recognize that psychological time is an absolute illusion.
You cannot practice your way into a peaceful state.
Because the very act of practicing implies you are actively managing current conflict.
Exactly.
You dismantle the conflict by realizing that you are not a manager overseeing your emotions. You are not the observer watching the anger. You are the anger.
And collapsing that false distance instantly removes the friction. It frees up the energy to simply observe the emotion until it combusts under the weight of your undivided attention.
But you cannot achieve this state by desiring it.
No, because desire simply projects a new image into the future, recreating the trap of time.
And you certainly cannot achieve it by waiting for an external authority to save you.
You are compelled to face the raw reality of your own consciousness, completely unmediated and completely alone.
It is an intense, demanding philosophy.
Mm.
But there is also something incredibly liberating about the immediacy of it.
Absolutely.
You don't have to wait 10 years to be a better person. You don't need a 10-step plan or a guru. The opportunity for total psychological freedom is always, immediately, right now.
That's the real takeaway.
And that brings us to one final, provocative thought to leave you with. Toward the end of the transcript, Krishnamurti briefly touches upon the concept of cause.
Which is fascinating.
It is. Almost everything we do in our lives is driven by a cause. You go to work because you want a paycheck. You act politely because you want social validation. You study because you want a degree.
Our entire existence is meticulously engineered around motive, cause, and desired outcome.
But he states something incredibly jarring. He says, love is not a cause.
Wow.
Think about the sheer weight of that statement. If every action in your life is tethered to a motive, you are constantly existing in the machinery of progress and transaction.
Always trying to get somewhere.
Consider what a single action in your day would actually look like if it had absolutely no cause, no hidden motive, no desired outcome, no image of how it might improve you or how it might benefit your future.
Just pure action.
What would it feel like, even for just a single microsecond, to step entirely off the transactional treadmill of progress and act purely without motive? Maybe then you finally wouldn't be quite so exhausted.